We begin with the latest from Louisville. So, Louisville police have announced that basically they're curfewing the entire city starting at 9 p.m. in anticipation of riots. A Louisville grand jury has now indicted only one officer in the Breonna Taylor police shooting, and that officer has not been indicted for murder. Former Detective Brett Hankinson was indicted on 3 counts of first-degree wanton endangerment. Now, the reason that nobody was indicted for murder is because this wasn't a murder, meaning that there was no violation of law implicit in effectuating a no-knock warrant, and then when you are fired upon firing back. The reason that wanton endangerment was charged, it's a Class D felony. It carries a penalty of 1 to 5 years in prison. The charges said that Hankinson wantonly shot a gun into at least an adjoining apartment. So that means that it really was not about Breonna Taylor being shot because, again, she was in the apartment in fairly close proximity to her boyfriend who was firing on police. It was because the shots that were fired at, I guess at other walls or something. Basically, it sounds like the prosecutors were firmly convinced they had to charge somebody or the city would burn. The judge has set a $15,000 cash bond for Hankinson. A warrant has been issued for him for his arrest. None of the officers were charged over the actual situation with Breonna Taylor, particularly. Protesters immediately began chanting, "No justice, no peace," because nothing says justice quite like a mob outside baying for a particular result, and then when they don't get it, then they suggest that they are going to do violence. The announcement came after Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron's office presented its findings to the grand jury earlier this week. His team has been investigating the Taylor shooting since May. As I mentioned, Mayor Greg Fisher has invoked a 72-hour curfew effective Wednesday night from 9 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. Last week, the city announced a $12 million settlement with Taylor's family. It includes more than a dozen police reforms, including revision of how no-knock warrants are actually used. Taylor's death has been showcased in news reports and in public statements by celebrities, athletes, etc. Now, here's the reality about the Breonna Taylor case. The police had a well-reasoned warrant to enter the apartment no-knock. The reason being, they had information that she was operating, or at least her apartment was being used as part of a drug ring by one of her boyfriends. There was 39 pages of evidence to that effect. She's on tape talking to that man about his involvement in the drug trade. They went to effectuate the warrant. They apparently knocked on the door despite it being a no-knock warrant. The current boyfriend inside the apartment then fired at the police officers when they came into the apartment, and they fired back on him and they killed Breonna Taylor. That's a tragedy. It is not a crime. So the actual crime apparently had really nothing to do with Breonna Taylor. It had to do with this particular officer firing in wild directions. When the door burst open, according to the study done by the Louisville police, one of the officers, the boyfriend, a man named Walker, fired a single shot from his Glock handgun. That actually hit one of the officers in the thigh, severing an artery. And then the 3 officers fired more than 24 rounds in response, spraying the apartment. Her death certificate, Breonna Taylor said she was hit 5 times. Walker was charged with attempted murder of a police officer and assault before those charges were dropped at the request of the Commonwealth's attorney, Tom Wine. Hankinson was fired for indiscriminately firing into Taylor's apartment. We'll see how the defense responds. Presumably what he will say is, "We were under fire and I fired." It seems like it'll be difficult to receive a conviction on those grounds. So that is the latest from Louisville.